16, an original etude composed by Victor Polatschek himself. No background on this one today, so let's get right into it. The etude is scored in D major 6/8 time with a tempo suggestion of allegro. Based on this indication, I'd suggest a performance tempo of quarter note equals 120 or so, faster if you like. In terms of the writing found in this etude, the material that's presented consists of long sequence of triplets modulating to B minor, then concluding in D major. Now, while this etude may look relatively simple on paper, there's actually quite a few hurdles to overcome to really get this sounding clean and musical. Overall, I believe the main objective for this etude is to master the ability to use alternate chromatic fingerings in a technical style. Since we are in D major, we are meandering through many F and F sharp half steps intervals throughout this. In particular, this etude is also a study in control and pacing. I believe, throughout this, we are going to really have to stay aware of the tempo that we start with, as the non-stop triplets make it really easy to rush ahead of the beat. Eventually, you might want to also try feeling the pulse in 1 so that the phrases start to feel a little bit more expansive. Generally speaking, I find that the tendency for this study is to rush the half-step intervals and fall behind on the arpeggiated patterns. Before playing, take some time in the early stages of your practice to go through and score study, mark all your fingerings and any other small reminders that may be useful. As I said, there's a lot of half steps that we'll cover in just a moment, but you may need to be flipping, using alternate 4-finger chromatic fingerings, pinky fingerings, all that. It's always good to mark it beforehand as your blueprint to make sure that your practice is as effective and efficient as possible. So starting off in measure 1, we begin the etude with an anacrusis, which basically means we have a small portion of a measure leading into the first real measure. So because of this, we're actually going to be starting off on B2, so you'll want to make sure that you're counting off in a way that provides you with a good pulse to make sure that we are feeling this in a larger beat in 1 for the rest of the etude. Although this music is marked at piano, also try thinking of focusing more on the quality of the air being used and less on the technical facility. Something that seems to work really well for many people is writing a crescendo marking in parentheses as a reminder to increase the air pressure and not actually grow louder in dynamic level. Doing this can really provide you with a small reminder to not back off on the air between the large intervals found throughout this. There's many instances. We have a throat tone A to a clarion B. That is a little iffy at times if it's not supported well. So just keep in mind that the air is always going to be number 1, especially in an etude that has this much technique. In measures 25 and 29, I suggest using the alternate side key fingerings for the written B5 to C#6 and C6 to D6. Now, both are going to be played using the second to top side key using the middle of the right index finger. Unless you are playing a slow sustained passage, it's typically better to make use of the alternate side key options so you avoid crossing the break and losing consistency in the timbre. Now when playing these, the key placement will definitely depend on the size of your hand and anatomy, but generally you'll also want to keep the placement of the key around the lower joint of the right hand index finger, keeping the rest of the fingers relaxed, curved, and close to the lower joint tone holes as much as possible. The one thing you really want to avoid is moving the entire hand up. That's going to break the hand position and cause a big issue when playing a fast technical study like this. So for me, I'm really trying to keep my fingers above the tone holes. My pinky finger is more or less over the C F key where I usually like to keep it, and I'm trying to keep those fingers anchored, raising the index finger coming up to the side key and then right back down. So very simple. I would practice maybe some trills from an A to a B flat up to a B natural. This can take some practice to get used to, but it's like any other thing on the clarinet. Once you practice it enough, it becomes easy. The one thing that can also help is adjusting your thumb rest in the back depending on your hand size. If you have a smaller hand size, then you might want to raise the thumb rest up. If you have a larger hand, then bring it down. If you can't adjust the thumb rest, you might also want to consider taking your clarinet to a repair person to get that adjusted. I find that sometimes with a lot of my students, just making some small adjustments with the thumb rest can actually make a lot of big improvements. Sometimes you might be working a lot harder than you have to, and a small adjustment can actually open up a lot of doors in the end. Moving farther ahead, in measure 49, we're going to need a flip between the written F#5 and E#5. Normally we want to avoid this, but since we have to play a D5 after the F sharp, using the fourth fingering will not be possible since the fourth finger would be actually unusable. Generally, my rule for flipping is that you must do it only if the note that comes after the F sharp 5 or the B natural in this case, if we're in the shiny register, the lower register, is a note that requires you to use fingers 2 and 3 in the right hand together, such as a D5, C sharp 5, a C5, or a B4. Any of these long fingerings, it's going to be really impossible to go from 4 fingering down to these, so that's why we usually have to flip. The same suggestion can also be applied for measures 144, 146, and 147. Sharp 4 to an E sharp 4 that's preceded by a low F sharp 3. Now, reviewing all of our options, using the chromatic side key option for the F sharp 4 would typically allow us to avoid flipping between the two notes repetitively. Since we are approaching from a longer fingering that requires the use of the right index finger, we cannot use the alternate option in this case. The same suggestion can be applied later in every other upcoming instance. In measure 101, we have an instance where we do want to use the side key chromatic fingering for the F4 to the F sharp 4, since we will then play an open G. Generally speaking, I would definitely say that when deciding on whether or not to use an alternate fingering, always consider the material that's coming before and after. Try each option, then select a fingering that will work best for the context of what is being played. When I'm practicing, I always pick my options that allow me to limit finger movement and keep the consistency in the timbre as much as possible. So let's take a step back to measure 75. I would definitely say this entire second page, 75 to the end, the use of the left hand becomes much more important. Throughout the second page of the Etude, pay close attention to how the left index finger is moving, especially for all movement between the throat tone register. We have a lot of A's to G sharps to F sharps, a lot of really small movements that need to be really precise to actually make this sound consistent and musical at a fast tempo. Because the left index finger plays such a critical role, I think it's really important to keep the hand position as a top priority when approaching this entire Etude. For me, issues that I experienced when practicing this material were mostly due to the left hand being slightly ahead or behind the beat, particularly on beats that only use the throat tones such as measures 98 and 99. And with that, we've reached the end of Etude 16 in Victor Polatschek's Advanced Studies for the Clarinet. Having reached the end of this masterclass, I hope you've gained a little bit of knowledge that prepares you for a fantastic performance in the future. In case you have any additional questions on this, as always, please feel free to comment below or send an email if you like. In the meantime, thank you so much for clicking today, and I'll see you next time for Etude 17. Happy practicing, stay safe, and see you again soon.